Well, joining us in studio to discuss this further is Transform RSA President, Mr. Adil Nchabeleng. Good afternoon to you, sir. Thank you for joining us here on ANN7. With regards to this news coming to the fore, can we see this as a step in the direction of radical economic transformation? We've heard this word a lot of times coming out of the president's mouth. What is your take on this?
Thank you so much, Abigail, and good afternoon to our viewers. Look, my take is this is quite a positive development, given the fact that now, after all the issues that have been raised regarding BEE as well as transformation within the country, that the JSE has now taken a progressive step towards addressing the socio-economic inequality in South Africa. Given the context of what is going on, let's go back and understand what is the JSE as an entity. The Johannesburg Securities Exchange is an exchange whereby investors as well as people with capital looking for opportunities globally as well as locally, looking for opportunities in South Africa, goes to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and look for companies that have already been structured in such a manner that is actually ready to be injected with extra capital. So the Johannesburg Stock Securities Exchange becomes now that vehicle by which capital and cash is brought into a pooled environment within the JSE, and then selection of companies that are already traded on the JSE Stock Exchange are then identified and targeted for particular cash as well as capital injection. So how does this particular move as well as the BEE regulation from the JSE empower us as now really the grassroots, the people on the ground who are saying that transformation must happen? From a Transform RSA point of view, our view is that it is a welcomed step in a good direction. It's a good step in the good direction, but we still question the intent behind it. Why has this not been done before? Why is it done now when already now the public protector has come out openly talking about the issues relating to the Reserve Bank? Why is it that it has not been done before when we were calling for economic transformation? So for us, it is not yet the step towards addressing the issue of radical economic transformation, but it is, although a good step towards progress, towards addressing the socio-economic inequality in South Africa.
And that was going to be my next question, the question of timing. Why now? What do you think the possibilities are?
Look, I think the issue of why now is the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is quite in a situation whereby it has to transform. It has no choice because the demographics of South Africa is, I'm going to give you an example. Here is a phone, all right? Here is a table which we're sitting with. The South African economy is this size. If you had to measure it by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange market and model, you'll find that it's this small, and we have this table and pool of people who comprise of South African population. How do you then make sure that there is available capital, there's available cash, there's available projects, opportunities, jobs, and everything available without having to address this huge economic imbalance within the population? So the economy has to expand. This cannot stay as it is right now within the smaller size. So the move by the JSE is quite positive and it's quite encouraging. But at the same time, we're saying that it must not be a window dressing process, because we have situations whereby all of these BEE regulations, BEE codes of good practice are pronounced. All that the companies do is they take the codes, go in and do a lovely window dressing around the code and make it look wonderful in paper writing, in reports, but it does not have an economic effect on the ground. So we are talking from a Transform RSA point of view to say radical economic transformation must have a trickling effect in terms of reaching the lives of the currently underprivileged, almost 60 to 80% of the poor population of South Africa. How does the Johannesburg Stock Exchange achieve that particular objective?
Let's chat a little bit about this compliance report and what needs to be established in that, and also how will companies be held accountable if they don't follow this rule?
Look, I would assume that the JSE at this stage has already decided that companies that flaunt the particular reporting process will be delisted. That's one process that you can take. The other aspect of it is penalties can be applied in terms of addressing the issue that the companies that are not really looking at the regulation issue and are not fulfilling on the regulatory issue are actually held accountable. It is about time that we have an institution like the JSE take proactive measures to address the challenges that we are faced with. The triple challenges that South Africa is faced with, which is unemployment, inequality, as well as joblessness. And in this case, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange sits with a huge amount of capital. Bear in mind that the stock exchange value right now, as we're talking, is sitting at around 12 trillion rands in South African currency. How does that then translate into making sure that the South African economy becomes viable? We can start trading. Smaller cap companies that are looking at raising funding as well as raising capital from the JSE can have access into the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So at some point, the JSE should start saying, within this regulatory framework, how do we open up a pool of, a fund which will start looking at emerging businesses as well as established black-owned businesses in terms of providing them the necessary capital. Right now, it is only addressing the already funded and capitalized companies.
Mr. Nchabeleng, just lastly, let's chat a little bit about the positives and what this is meant to do with regards to this empowerment status disclosure and the platform that it brings for. What are we trying to achieve here? What are we wanting to achieve with this being implemented?
Look, the regulation has two folds to it. One, you could say that, the JSE is trying to address the issues that they are currently faced with. There's a complaint that the JSE has not transformed in all the years that it has been in existence. It still models itself around the colonial white monopoly capital, feature as well as, structure. It has not allowed for South Africans particularly to start having access into the JSE. What will change within the short-term, medium space is these companies that are listed now will have now the conscience responsibility on their part, will have now the responsibility to say that since I'm a listed entity, there are certain regulations and regulatory framework that I have to abide by. And to abide by that and actually fulfill that, one has to take into conscience that now the implementation of the particular BEE regulation requires that you bring in the suppliers aspect of your company must be upgraded. The aspect of socio-economic development towards communities must be reflected within your reports. The aspect of your ownership, which is quite critical and important. We know that the JSE is currently sitting at a 3% black ownership, which is not sufficient. We would like to have black-owned companies as well as black ownership of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange rise up to a minimum level of 30% ownership. And beyond the 30%, we must reach the balance of the population, which is about 50% and plus. Because we're talking about an African economy here. We cannot have a colonial reflection of a Johannesburg Stock Exchange that continuously have patterns of our past that we have already done and made peace with.
But the average South African sitting at home watching this interview, asking themselves, how does this impact me? How does this better my life? What is your answer to them?
It does impact their life greatly. The Johannesburg Stock Exchange sits on the companies that are currently employing the majority of South Africans in South Africa. Apart from government, the most lucrative and most active economic sector in South Africa is sitting on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So if people do not understand, we should take them back to the situation to say, this is a pool of capital that funds the existing day-to-day companies that might not be known in South Africa that are contributing towards the socio-economic impact as well as growth of South Africa. But these companies have now a responsibility to increase and make sure that they bring in smaller other companies in terms of empowering them on supplier basis, on socio-economic development, on skills development, on making sure that the ownership of those particular companies that are sitting on the JSE changes properly. Even the inclusion of management and black people on boards as well as management. Right now we have CEOs within the JSE who are seen to be black, but in actual fact have not yet made the taint as well as the down effect that we're looking at in terms of making sure that we can start seeing the trickle-down effect of the proceeds that are coming out of the money raised out of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange now trickling down into the economy. You have a lot of window dressing. You have wonderful CEOs who are sitting there, wonderfully educated, but are not making an impact in terms of the day-to-day lives of the people. If I was a CEO sitting on a Johannesburg-listed company and I am responsible for steering the ship of a particular company in a direction and with the capital that I've already been given to do that particular thing, one is I would start looking out of the box. the economy of South Africa is far much more wide and diverse, including the African opportunity, the emerging markets in Africa. And I'll start looking at that and start bringing in that into the organization's culture and do the transformation. So from Transform RSA point of view, yes, we congratulate the Johannesburg Securities Exchange for the bold move to address radical economic transformation. But we're saying that this must not be a measure by which it will just be a yardstick to show off reports of who has complied, when we know in truth it is not the real effect in the economy.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Nchabeleng. Let's leave it there for now. We appreciate you coming and talking to us here on ANN7. Always a pleasure chatting to you here. That was Mr. Adil Nchabeleng, the Transform RSA president, joining us in studio this afternoon just to chat to us about this news coming through that JSE listed companies are now required to publish a compliance report on their broad-based economic empowerment